Hi, I'm Catherine and I'm an information officer with the Dyslexia Association. Today I'll be talking about dyslexia and self esteem for children and young people. While dyslexia itself does not cause low self esteem by any stretch of the imagination, the challenges that school and society can present to a dyslexic person, if left unaddressed, can absolutely have a detrimental effect on a person's confidence and perception of their own capabilities, and even their value as a person in society. But this is a worst case scenario, and there is no reason that a dyslexic young person must, by default, have low self esteem. To this end, I will be focusing on how you can help your child feel confident, capable, supported, and encouraged. We will be touching on topics like how to talk to your child about their dyslexia, the usefulness of role models, having a growth mindset, cycles of self esteem, problem solving, worry and anxiety, the relationship and disconnect between success and effort, how to set expectations, and a few other things as well. To begin, I'm going to speak a bit about what dyslexia actually is and how it can manifest, as an understanding of the experience of dyslexia can better equip a person to provide encouragement, support, and of course, empathy. So, as we can see here, dyslexia is a difficulty acquiring age appropriate reading, writing, and/or spelling skills. It occurs in a spectrum, so that means that it can range from mild to severe with a range of levels in between. And these two things also mean that there is variance between people's abilities and different skills. One person may find spelling more difficult, while another person may struggle more with reading. That's to say, there isn't one experience of dyslexia, and it really does vary from person to person. Dyslexia is hereditary and has a neurological basis. It's lifelong and there is no cure. This means that it's not at all uncommon for the parent of a dyslexic child to be dyslexic themselves. And it also means that although the dyslexia may have less of a visible impact as a child grows up, they do still remain dyslexic. Similarly, appropriate support can bring about huge improvements in reading, writing, and spelling for a lot of people. It doesn't have a cure, and it's not a disease. It's not something that's wrong with someone, it's a difference in how people are wired, for want of a better word. There's been research done where dyslexic adults have been asked would they give up their dyslexia if they could, and the majority say no, it's a part of who they are, and the good things that they feel it brings to their life are really valuable to them. That might be creativity or their way of thinking about the world. So, although it brings its challenges, it's really not necessarily a source of pain or anguish for the vast majority of people. It's just a part of who they are. So, how can dyslexia manifest? It differs from person to person, but broadly, dyslexia affects phonics and sounds, working memory, and language processing automaticity. So, phonics are basically the building blocks of language. English has 42 phonemes, which are the sounds that make up the language, so or g or oo. English has only 26 letters though, which means that combinations of letters produce sounds that are different to the letters by themselves. So boil spells boil, not boil. To further complicate things, English is a Germanic language which has a lot of vocabulary which comes from Latin or Greek, so spellings and pronunciations can be quite strange or idiosyncratic. Compare the words though, tough, and through, for example. All of this combined means that if someone has difficulty already with learning phonics, there are a lot of places they can trip up. Working memory is the memory that you use while doing an activity. So, an example of this might be having to remember a piece of information that will be used again later in an activity. So, if I were to do a sum like 3 by 4 plus 2 by 7, first I have to multiply 3 by 4 and I get 12. Then I have to remember that number 12 while I multiply 7 by 2 so that I can then add both numbers together. Working memory would also be used to remember instructions while completing a task or keeping the question being asked in your mind while you read a passage. Language processing automaticity is basically how easily or efficiently someone can retrieve the word they need. The combination of these things means that some people may struggle to read fluently as well as to remember and recall what they have read. Some might find it hard to sound out words when they're trying to spell them, or the effort of deciphering words might make it difficult to answer comprehension questions at the same time. But not all difficulties are due exclusively with literacy. Some people may be forgetful or struggle with organisation. Organising thoughts and ideas on paper may be difficult. Some pupils experience a difficulty with learning things by rote or by heart. Although the underlying abilities that cause these challenges are likely always going to be present, that doesn't mean that they will always cause problems or manifest in exactly the same way. Accommodations can be made and different tools and technologies can help. Someone might use a reader pen so that they can better understand and recall what they're reading. Similarly, students can build up a good knowledge of sight words. Others might spend the time to develop a system or setup that makes it easier for them to keep organised. They might figure out the best way to make sure they are reminded of something that they might forget, be it a well placed post it note or a reminder on the phone. Mind maps, dictation, or the use of visuals can serve as a good first step to getting work down on paper. There's many different ways to approach different problems, and figuring out what the difficulty at the root of a problem is will make it a lot easier to find a solution that works for the individual. Although we do tend to talk a lot about the academic side of things, the challenges arising from dyslexia may appear in forms other than the marks awarded in a test or an assignment. Some young people might express a real reluctance to go to school because they find the day quite stressful. Others might be really preoccupied with being right and they might worry and stress about making mistakes or about their grades being good enough. Some kids are going to mess around in class a lot, maybe as a way to protect themselves against criticism or questions around their ability. Others may unfortunately experience bullying or people going that bit too far with their slagging, or they might be the ones who are giving it rather than receiving it. There might be a lot of intentionally forgotten homework or reluctance to engage. Other young people might become withdrawn, socially isolated, or very easily upset. These are all different ways of dealing with stress, essentially. So, if you're noticing a pattern developing or some worrisome behaviour, it is important that you talk to your child and to their teachers and figure out what can be done. It can be helpful to ask, can stress be reduced in this situation, or is it something where stress has to be managed? If a child doesn't want to go to school because they despise reading aloud, then a discussion should definitely be had with the teacher to see what workarounds can be made. Can a young person be let know in advance so they can read the text in preparation, or maybe they feel more comfortable if the teacher is standing close by? Or maybe they prefer to be able to suggest themselves to read in class rather than being picked at random. If a child has become very easily upset or is struggling with perfectionism or just seems to be struggling with negative emotions, and all the relevant accommodations have been introduced, then it will be worth looking at stress management. Can they take up a sport or a hobby that gives them an outlet and also helps them build their self esteem? Maybe they would benefit from seeing a counsellor once a fortnight or once a month, or maybe they might find meditation really helpful. It can, of course, be very helpful to speak to your GP about these matters as well. It does depend on the person and the situation, but definitely look and see how stress can be reduced and then ask, in what ways can stress in general be managed? Today we're going to be talking about dyslexia and self esteem, and so far I've been covering the difficulties of dyslexia. And I suppose there might be the view that, oh, if someone has dyslexia, then of course they're going to struggle with self esteem and self confidence. But that's not the case at all, far from it. The experience of the challenges of dyslexia means that some people become very determined and self motivated. Some people become excellent leaders because they've learned what their strengths are and they've gotten very good at delegating work to others. Other people may be really creative and think outside of the box and are able to problem solve in a way different to their peers. They might be able to see options and possibilities that aren't so obvious to others. And as people become more self aware and understand themselves better, they'll gain more knowledge into how they learn and work best, and they will be able to apply that to their lives. Encouragement, belief, and understanding are really essential in allowing these traits to develop, but those are things that you can absolutely provide to your child. We're often asked how to approach speaking to your child about dyslexia, and it can be hard to know what to say or how to explain it, and it can also be easy to worry about saying the wrong thing. We'll cover a few things here that will hopefully help you feel a bit more confident approaching the conversation. So, first of all, dyslexia is a part of who your child is, and although it is not something you would wish for your child or choose for them, it's not something that can be or needs to be fixed. And it's quite important to challenge any belief that dyslexia is a bad or faulty part of who they are as a person. It's just a part of them. It's not a badness or a fault, it's a difficulty. And if they're having difficulty being kind to themselves about the challenges they've been experiencing, then compassion for themselves should be absolutely encouraged. Should you tell your child that they're dyslexic? That's a question that we receive pretty frequently, and we would say yes, it's best to be honest. I think it's normal to be reluctant to label a person, and you might worry it might restrict them. But if someone is struggling with reading and writing every day in school, unless they're given a word for it, they're likely to label themselves something else, and that's likely to be a much more negative word. The word dyslexia then can be empowering for a lot of people and can allow them to feel a sense of kinship with others who are also dyslexic. Being able to label their experience and then being in the position to learn more about it will also better enable them to understand how they learn and gain the self knowledge that is so valuable in figuring out how to best tackle challenges as they arise. Your child will follow your lead, so if you're upset about it, they'll be upset. Be aware of the tone that you're using. If you're talking about it in a hushed tone, saying that you have dyslexia, they're going to feel that it's something they should be ashamed of, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. On this same point, for some parents and guardians, a diagnosis of dyslexia can be a real shock to the system, and a lot of worries and anxieties might descend upon you. That's not an uncommon response. You shouldn't beat yourself up about it. But if this is the case, take some time to process it yourself. You don't need to get the psychological report in the morning and then tell your child in the afternoon. You can take a little bit of time to let it sink in and let yourself react. And then once you feel that you're maybe that bit more centered and grounded again, then have the conversation with your child. If you're for whatever reasons upset by it, leave that bit of space. Have a chat with friends and family who you know will be understanding so that you can get to the place where you think, yes, this is fine, this is workable, this is a challenge, but we can meet it. That's the attitude you want to bring to a conversation with your child, not one of anxiety or frustration or defeat. Continuing on from earlier points, it is important that people are aware of their strengths and the challenges they face. This is not something that's unique to dyslexia, but of course, dyslexic kids are faced with their challenges Monday to Friday of each week. So it is important to have conversations around this so they don't put maybe a less helpful logic on their experience. It can be a real benefit to talk yourself about challenges you've experienced, as well as things that maybe granny or granddad struggle with, or other important people in their life. It can be really affirming for a young person to talk to someone older who they admire about how they understand their own strengths and difficulties. It can be easy to see other people as perfect or as not having any sort of weakness at all, which is, of course, patently untrue of anyone's experience of life. I'll recommend some different resources that can help show the reality of this fact in the next few slides. Finally, there isn't going to be one conversation about dyslexia. You want there to be open, lifelong communication. Dyslexia can appear to change throughout someone's life. The fundamentals of it don't essentially change, but changes in circumstances can alter how it manifests. So, how your child experiences the challenges or the benefits of dyslexia at age 8 are going to be different to their experience at 13 or 14, and then different again as they enter into adulthood. So, it is important to keep that in mind. You don't need to get everything into one conversation. In fact, that's not what you want to do. So, I've just talked about what sort of points to touch on when speaking to your child about dyslexia. So, the what you say, but there is also an element of the how to do the conversation. First of all, it can be helpful to talk about difficult things while doing something else. It takes a bit of the pressure or intensity off. So, it could be while you're out for a drive or out for a walk, maybe you're watching TV, or maybe you're playing games together, something like that. Those might be good times to open a conversation about it. In particular, they would be good opportunities to talk with a young person who's maybe a little reluctant to talk about emotional things in a more focused or formal way. Similarly, books and stories can also be a really great resource for starting a conversation and are also just a great way to get to grips with the topic. I have 3 books here for different age groups. The first 2 are both storybooks. Tom's Special Talent would be suitable for early primary, while It's Called Dyslexia would be suitable for children between the ages of 7 and about 10. Dyslexia is My Superpower will be suitable for children from about the age of 11 up through secondary. The book contains interviews with more than 100 children and young adults with dyslexia, and in these interviews, they share their own personal tips and their own experiences and offer advice on what does and doesn't work for them. There are also drawings and illustrations included. I'd also recommend this book to parents and guardians as it offers a real insight into the experience of dyslexia through childhood and adolescence. Videos and multimedia resources can serve the same sort of purpose. The image on screen is taken from the British Dyslexia Association's See Dyslexia Differently, which is a short video explaining dyslexia in a kid-friendly way, and it's available on YouTube. It's a great explainer and may also be something your child could use if they wanted to explain dyslexia to a friend, for example. YouTube has a lot of great resources, and a number of dyslexia organisations have YouTube channels. Our channel contains advice and tips both for the families of dyslexic young people and for adults with dyslexia too. Dyslexia Scotland has a range of content available, including the Great At Home with Dyslexia series, which has a lot of great tips. And the British Dyslexia Association similarly has a variety of videos available on their channel, including the above See Dyslexia Differently video, as well as a series of short videos for educators. Made by Dyslexia has interviews with a number of prominent people with dyslexia, which also may be of interest to you or your child. Finally, we have a podcast called This and That, which is available on SoundCloud and through the usual podcast channels. Each episode is an interview with an adult with dyslexia, and this podcast might be more suitable for teenagers or parents and guardians. So, we've talked about how you yourself should approach talking about dyslexia and what tools and approaches you can use, but of course, you're not the only person who is going to speak about dyslexia in your child's life. Attitudes in society have improved, and people have a lot more knowledge than they used to have, but there is still a lot of work to do, and you may need to take a bit of initiative around this. In school, any bullying or unwanted teasing should be nipped in the bud. Teachers should be alerted to the issue and it should be dealt with as soon as possible and not let fester or to become a habit of the people in question. If it is a thing where a teacher makes an unwanted remark, that also should be raised. On a more positive note, the class teacher might be open to doing something for Dyslexia Awareness Week or even a more general Neurodiversity Week, which might feel a bit less like a spotlight on more reserved children. At home, siblings can, of course, get a bit carried away, and if it is a thing where your child's dyslexia is being used in arguments or they're being prodded about it a lot, it is important to take steps to stop that and make it clear that it's off limits. It can be helpful when doing this to talk to the other child about strengths and difficulties and about how we all have them, and maybe ask how they would feel if they were being teased about things they feel self conscious about or that they find difficult despite their best efforts. Having this conversation can make the problem of teasing less of a discipline question and more an opportunity to teach your child about the importance of compassion and empathy. Role models can serve a very powerful purpose for people, and it can be really affirming for someone to know that they share a trait with someone who they admire. This can be particularly helpful if someone is feeling that being dyslexic precludes them from achieving the things that they would like to achieve, or is maybe feeling a bit fatalistic about things. Also, as I mentioned earlier, books and narratives can be really helpful, so it might be worthwhile looking into biographies of people that your child admires who have dyslexia. This might be something more suitable for an older teenager, but it can be really empowering to hear the story of how someone got to where they are, especially because these stories inevitably involve struggle and perseverance. There's a huge number of people with dyslexia who've gone on to achieve great success and celebrity, and I've included a number of these people over the next few slides. We also have a page on our website which has a more extensive list again. So first of all, we have two icons, Marilyn Monroe and Albert Einstein. We also have chef Jamie Oliver, and then three actors, Whoopi Goldberg, Channing Tatum, and Keira Knightley, as well as Walt Disney himself. Next up, we have the filmmaker Steve McQueen. Interestingly enough, the other Steve McQueen, the American actor, is also dyslexic, which I learned recently. Beside him is Keanu Reeves, and then we have polar explorer Anne Bancroft, and then finally poet and dramatist W.B. Yeats. On the second row, we have the diplomat and activist Eleanor Roosevelt, actor Henry Winkler, the musician Florence Welch, and then Oscar-winning actor Octavia Spencer. We also have Leonardo da Vinci, the microbiologist and Nobel laureate Carl Greider, inventor Thomas Edison, Agatha Christie, Muhammad Ali, Steven Spielberg, and Isaac Newton. It's clear enough from this list of names that dyslexia does not prevent people from going on to achieve great things in a wide variety of ways, across a wide variety of disciplines. There's scientists, there's actors, there's writers, there's explorers, there's sports people, activists, musicians. So, with all that said, and with all those names named, a role model does not have to be famous, and in fact, it's often better when they're not. If there's someone in your lives who is dyslexic, ask them to have a chat about it with your child, and it may be that they can be that someone who your child can talk to about the particular challenges dyslexia brings with it, who they can relate to. This might be you. It might be a granny, a cousin, a neighbour, but it can really be quite meaningful to have someone who will just get it. So here is an illustration which I think really captures what success is and how it appears. When it comes to success, people only really see the end product or the big finish. But success isn't arrived at randomly or spontaneously, it's a product of many different things. So here we see persistence, dedication, hard work, good habits, and sacrifice. And we also see failure and disappointment. All of these things are what brings success. As I've mentioned, role models and books and different media can be really effective in showing how people have overcome the challenges of dyslexia. They can also be really useful in showing the persistence and disappointment and good habits and so on that constitute that success. Also, success doesn't have to be this big visible thing, and it doesn't at all need to be a perfect score or a first prize. There's usually and more often success in pursuing personal goals, and those are going to vary from person to person, but they're not any less important or less valuable than something that might draw more attention from other people, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. As I just mentioned, failure and disappointment are a part of the efforts of success, but a surplus of them can of course have an effect on a person's self-esteem. We have here two cycles of self-esteem, which I think are quite helpful in showing how both low and high self-esteem can be self-perpetuating. This This self perpetuation means that it's really important to intervene when you hear or witness elements of the low self esteem cycle, like negative self talk. You essentially want to circuit break whenever possible. So it is really important to challenge negative thinking. If you hear, I'm stupid, make sure that it's contradicted and that it's made clear that finding something difficult is not stupidity and that it's important to speak kindly to yourself. If you hear, I can't do it, make sure they understand that they can do it, that although it may take hard work, they will get there, and really show how valuable perseverance is and how persevering is something that you can choose to do. You can't choose to have dyslexia or to not have it, but you can choose to work hard. Also, just normalize making mistakes. Ensure that they know that mistakes have value, it's how you learn. So if you hear a negative remark when they trip up while working on some homework, remind them that this is how people learn. Learning is a process, not a competition to be won, and you make a mistake so you can learn not to make that mistake. Comparing oneself to others is never a good idea for anyone. And if you hear your child saying, oh, Mary in my class always gets 100% in her spelling tests, remind them that the only person they should compare themselves to is themselves. And remind them of all the improvements that they've made and how far they've come along and how much more they're going to learn. Sometimes it seems that encouragement and praise are synonymous, but they're not. They're not the same thing. Focus more on showing interest rather than on praising. This might be in regards to a hobby they have or a project they're working on. Ask them questions, let them be the expert. You don't need to praise what they're doing because by showing interest in them and in what they're doing, you're showing them that it's valuable and that they're valuable. When you do give praise, don't just dish it out. Kids generally develop a sense of when someone is giving them false praise pretty quickly, and you want them to be able to trust what you're saying. You don't want them to think that you just say whatever you think they want to hear or what might make them feel better. So give genuine praise and make it specific. For example, it was very thoughtful of you to make sure that your cousin was being included in the game, rather than you're always so good. Or another example, I like the way you drew the landscape in your picture, rather than this drawing is amazing. This method of making specific comments are also another way of demonstrating that you're interested in them and think that the things they make and do are worth your thought and time. You don't want them to think that you're just saying things because it's your job to. Also, it can be helpful to put together a small box or file of things that your child can refer to when they're maybe feeling a bit down on themselves. This might be a box with some reminders of past achievements and things that they're proud of, as well as pictures of friends and family and reminders of happy memories. This can be something that they can pick and look through when they're feeling a bit out of sorts, and it can help them remember how much they've done and how loved they are. As we spoke about earlier, worry, stress, and anxiety may become a problem for some young people with dyslexia. So, first things first, exercise, sufficient sleep, and nutritious food will strengthen mental health. So, if they've been a bit cooped up and haven't been getting much fresh air, or they've been staying up late studying, or maybe on their phones, or they've been skipping breakfast a lot recently, look at those things first and see if some improvements can be made there to help them become that bit more resilient and able to cope with stress as it arises. Obviously, these things aren't fix-alls, but they're a good place to start. As tempting as it can be, it's important to avoid reassurance and instead encourage problem solving. If a person is very worried about something, telling them that it'll be fine, don't worry about it, can ultimately make them feel fobbed off or make them feel like their emotions are wrong or irrational. Instead, there should be more of a focus on problem solving, although not at the expense of rushing past emotions. Sometimes people need to just decompress or unburden themselves a bit. Worries can seem so much more manageable once they've been spoken out loud. Worrying is normal. Your child might be worrying about starting secondary school, about reading in class, about not being able to keep up with work, that someone might make fun of them for attending learning sport, and what worries one person may not faze another person at all, and vice versa. Being given space to talk about their worries allows a child the opportunity to develop self awareness. It also allows them the opportunity to develop emotional intelligence and self regulation. Listen and try to empathize and validate their experience. At this point in the conversation, don't be reaching for a solution. Allow them to talk first and kind of get it out of their system. If they start crying, let them. Crying can be really helpful in terms of stress relief. Some calming deep breaths can be helpful if they're feeling a bit ungrounded. And after this part of the conversation, it's time to move on to the problem solving, but don't be afraid to go back and sit in the emotion a bit more if it turns out that they're not quite ready to move on to that next stage of trying to find an answer to their problem. I'm going to cover problem solving a bit more in the next slide, but just to continue on this thread, as I mentioned before, books and videos can be great conversation starters, and also having conversations in different locations or during different activities can be helpful for some people who otherwise might be reluctant to share what's on their mind. I also spoke a little bit about stress management and stress reduction earlier on. If your child is maybe a bit too much on at the moment and is not really getting much time to unwind, or maybe there's specific things that are happening in school that are causing them stress, then these things should be specifically addressed. Then it's a question of ensuring that they're managing stress. Different people manage stress in different ways, and it's worth trying out different options until they find something that works for them. Some people like to go for a run, others will watch a comedy, some people might paint or draw, while others might like cooking or gaming or whatever it is. The work as such of unwinding and relaxing is as important as schoolwork, so it should be something that has its place in your child's day. Sometimes students in exam years might get very wrapped up in study, so it's important to make sure they understand that relaxing is an essential part of achievement. It's as important as hard work, especially if they want to avoid burning out. Of course, if stress and worry and anxiety have become a real source of difficulty for your child and the interventions you've taken at home just don't seem to be making enough of an impact, a visit to the GP can be really helpful as they will be able to advise with regards to next steps and tell you as well what resources are available locally. So, first of all, two quick tips on problem solving. One, focus on your child's strengths, not on what they find difficult. Their strengths are going to be what they use to solve the problem, and by focusing on them, you're boosting their confidence and you're teaching them to work at what they have, rather than focusing on what they find difficult. Secondly, when discussing a problem, avoid raising past difficulties. This time it's different, it's a new situation, you don't want to get mired down in things that have gone wrong in the past, so try and keep fresh eyes about the issue at hand. For some people, they can solve problems in their sleep, while for others, it can be quite helpful to take it step by step. I've included here an example of a 5-step approach to problem solving. The first step is identifying the problem and make this as specific as possible. Then develop at least 5 possible solutions. Some of these can be ones that would never work, but at this point it's not about deciding what would work or not, it's about coming up with possibilities. Once you have a list of possible options, then it's a question of discussing what the pros and cons of each one are. Then pick a solution based on the pros and cons, and then test out that solution. After the solution has been tested, reflect on whether it's been a success or not, and if it hasn't given the results that are needed, then go back and pick out another option to test it out. And try to treat that first attempt as a learning experience and part of the process rather than as a failure. More information on this process is also available at the link on screen. You might have heard the term growth mindset before. Essentially, it's the belief that talents can be developed through hard work, good strategies, and input from others. This is in contrast with a fixed mindset, where someone believes that their talents are their talents and there's no real space for improvement. A growth mindset is great to have and to develop, but it can be particularly helpful to cultivate in someone who has dyslexia and who may feel confined by their current abilities or difficulties. This attitude also means acknowledging that along with growth and improvement, there will also be setbacks or times when it feels like progress is not being made. Also, in the context of problem solving, it's a good mindset to consciously get into before starting the process. This way, your child can develop the habit of saying to themselves, okay, well, this thing is causing me problems at the moment, but I know that I can use hard work, a bit of thinking, and the help of others to get where I need to be, rather than thinking, oh, I'm useless and there's no point in trying because I just am the way I am. At some point, that attitude is going to become more automatic, but it may be that at first you need to reorient your child to thinking that way when they have encountered a difficulty and are attempting to find a solution to that difficulty. This attitude can also be really helpful in avoiding the pitfall of learned helplessness, which is the habit of giving up when encountering a barrier rather than persisting. Often progress can be hard to spot on a day-to-day basis, and it may take weeks or months for the benefits of hard work to become visible. So reward systems can be really helpful in building perseverance and dedication and the habit of hard work. We would say avoid paying your child to go to school or to do homework. This can quickly get very expensive and it's not necessarily a great precedent to set, even just in terms of your bank account. Um, Rewards can be something that they were going to get anyway, so maybe a new pair of runners, or a book they wanted, or a trip to the zoo. Field trips can also be used as treats and can be educational as well, so a trip to the cliffs of Moher, for example. It's important not to use punishment or deprivation in this context. The focus should be on reward. Similarly, the reward should not really be based on grades or the more superficial elements of success. It should be a reward for hard work and consistency. This will help build a good work ethic, which will absolutely stand to your child throughout their education and also in their life beyond school. Success itself can be a great motivator. A child seeing that they've done the task at hand every day since Monday will likely be pushed to finish out their streak of success. Using charts to make this visual and also to give the gratification of crossing off another day can be really effective. As marks and tests and exams are typically how success is measured in school, it really might be up to yourselves to make sure that this alternative and more accurate measure of success is available to your child. Having records in this way too means that if your child is feeling really down about a particular result or outcome, they can look at the proof that they have worked very hard and be reminded of their capability in that way. It is important to create high standards for your child so that they have them for themselves. This isn't about expecting them to get all A's, it's about expecting them to put the work in consistently and to apply themselves. The hard work that they put in may be mismatched their output, so do keep that in mind and don't punish imperfect results, but instead focus on the fact that they've been responsible and hardworking and made a genuinely good effort. It can be easy to focus only on academic improvement, but it is also really important to develop skills and abilities outside of the classroom. This can be in anything at all: sports, music, making videos or graphics, anything. Experiencing success at a task is essential to the development of the confidence necessary to believe that one can learn new things and achieve goals. In effect, depending entirely on school to provide this feeling of success is putting your eggs all in one basket. If academics are not someone's strong point, they might find it really difficult to experience that feeling of delight that comes with the successful completion of a task. Alongside this, the skill of persisting until you learn a skill or achieve a certain goal, whether it be learning how to solo a ball or play a certain tune, or edit a video or build a structure in Minecraft, is transferable. It can also be a real boost if your child is the household expert on something. Maybe they know loads about dinosaurs or animals, about their favourite sports team or band, or whichever topic it is that interests them. Showing an interest in this subject, asking questions, and encouraging their expertise will make them feel more confident in themselves. We've touched on setting expectations a bit, but just a few more points here. Goals should be achievable with hard work, and if maybe expectations were set a bit too high or a bit too low previously, just take that on board and adjust accordingly. You really want it to be something that they can achieve if they apply themselves, but not so easy that they aren't growing from the goals or that they find it too easy to dismiss their attainment. Expect success. If you don't, they'll pick up on that and they will be less likely to reach that goal. Your child is really capable, and it is really about giving them the opportunity to show that. If goals seem a bit too large or daunting, divide them into smaller, attainable goals. This is just a great skill to have for life, so it's great to work on developing it as soon as possible. But it does also mean that a young person is more likely to succeed. It can be helpful to make goals small enough that they can be achieved within one sitting or one day. This will help build momentum and generate motivation. Communicate your confidence in them and in their future. You believe that your child is so talented and capable and has so much potential, but make sure that they know that you think that too. Affirm that yes, absolutely, you do not doubt that they will learn to read or that they will pass their exams. It might be hard for them to believe in themselves at times, so it's really important that you're there to believe in them when they're struggling to do it themselves. Finally, be supportive, encouraging, and accommodating. Take account of the fact that they find some things more difficult and maybe they work better in different ways. Don't expect them to achieve the same things as someone who isn't dyslexic while using the same methods. Try out different strategies and technology and find out what works for them and what helps them to express themselves and their knowledge most effectively. Make sure you've got their back. So, finally, you are the biggest influence on your child's future successes. Supporting, challenging, helping, and caring about your child and their development is the most important contribution you can make. Continue to have high expectations for your child and ensure you instill in them that the possibilities are endless when you have an open mind. So that brings this presentation to a close. Thank you for your time and your attention. If you have any more queries around dyslexia or around our assessment process, you can contact us by email at the addresses above or by phone at 01 877 6001.